Our next guest, over a period of years, took some time to look at what traditional media was doing when it came to covering various stories and how they covered those stories, if they covered them at all. I guess that's a two-headed monster. Some stories don't get covered, others do get covered, but they tend to get covered in ways that follow a certain narrative that's already established. And so what she did is she established something called the Voice of Idaho. You can find it online, and she has been working diligently with a small staff to actually make this thing look like it's a very, very impressively big publication. Her name is Vicky Davis. She's an Idaho native, spending some time with us this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 30. We're coming up on 8 minutes after 9 o'clock. Vicky, first of all, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you for having me. But I do have to correct one thing. I don't own TBOI News. I just work with them.
Okay, so you are what you might call the star reporter.
Yeah, you might say that.
And you have another site of your own too.
Yeah, I actually have two of them. One of them is called channelingreality.com. That's my old website, and it's kind of frozen in time at this point because it's old technology. And then I have a new website called The Technocratic Tyranny, because primarily what I focus on are the systems of government, the organizational structure, how things have changed since the 1990s, and that sort of thing. You know, the integration of our federal government systems into what is becoming a global system of governance. And when I say things like that, people sometimes think it's conspiracy theory. But you won't find any conspiracy theory on my website at all.
In fact, you actually have the actual evidence to back up your claims, and a lot of this is tied into the fact that we've developed technology to the point it's making this more and more possible from a government angle.
Yes, that's exactly right. The systems nowadays, you know, with massively parallel processing and PCs and just the horsepower of computing technology makes it possible to have systems that operate at a global level. And in fact, all of you taxpayers out there, you're paying for a global health system. And I don't know if you knew that or not, but, you know, well, really wonderful of you to do that.
We know we know a lot of money is being taken out of our pockets, and tracking it from the average individual doesn't necessarily have a lot of ability to do that, or they simply don't have the time. And it's great that someone like you comes along and invests those efforts in that. We have this situation going on in Oregon, and I've been struggling the last several days how to describe this, because I hear occupation, I hear takeover, but it's simply a group of people, as I understand it, that walked in and sat down in a building that was open, and a building that normally is open, and they're not trespassing because there were no trespassing warnings in the area when they arrived. And yet you've got a media, the mainstream media, Vicky, seems to be focusing on this, the questions being, well, you guys are bad, and why are you bad, and nobody likes you, and why don't they like you, instead of trying to actually address why they happen to be there. You've gone there. You got a chance to meet with these people. What's your impression?
My impression is that they are patriots who engaged, you know, conservative patriots who engaged in a kind of an act of civil disobedience. And there was, the guys have their guns, but I mean, when I was there, there was no tension. I walked around the whole headquarters area. There were groups of people that were standing and talking, having serious discussions, you know, about the BLM and what the BLM is doing to the ranchers and what can be done about it, and, you know, those kinds of things. But it was absolutely nothing like what the mainstream media was saying it was.
I get the impression there are people in mainstream media who would actually like to see the federal government go in there guns a-blazing and have a big shootout and, you know, a fiery end because it would draw people to their television sets. And I guess when you say they have firearms, number one, they would like to defend themselves if they're attacked. But number two, they come from a culture where firearms, if you grew up in ranching country, you knew how to use a firearm by the time you were 5 years old.
Right. Well, I grew up in Idaho, and even my brother. I mean, my dad took him hunting, from the time he was 12 years old. So that's just the way of life out here in the West. But back east, it's a different story. And I have to say, I'm totally a Second Amendment person. But in the city, when I lived in New York City, I was really kind of glad that, I didn't have to worry about all the people around me having guns on them. So it's just a different life. It's a different lifestyle. And that's the problem with trying to make a one-size-fits-all rule of law for everybody, because one rule does not apply across the board for all circumstances, for all people, in all places.
I keep hearing from people that I think are good constitutional conservatives, that they love liberty, but many of them are telling me this guy, Mr. Bundy, shouldn't be leading this effort. Uh, I read an editorial the other day, and I think it was the Wall Street Journal, where the writer said that they have legitimate grievances, but the takeover, or whatever they're calling it in newspapers, is a bad idea. And I thought, yes, but you wouldn't be writing about the legitimate grievances in this case. You've had a chance to meet Mr. Bundy. Uh, he is not, to my knowledge, as stupid or backward as people are trying to portray him.
No. I didn't actually get a chance to meet him face to face, but I did talk to him on the phone. And he's a good man. You can tell he has a strong sense of right and wrong. And what's going on out there at the BLM and putting people out of business, and what happened to the Hammond family was just a travesty of justice. And the fact of the matter is that all of these patriot groups, everybody, rah rah, wave the flag, all of that, but the way our government is operating, they do not respond. You could write the best paper about, something wrong that is happening. They will not even read it. And so, how are people supposed to respond to that? Yeah, meet, talk, and nothing happens. So, Mr. Bundy made something happen.
How do you think this is going to end? I keep thinking there's going to be some sort of negotiated settlement, and some of what they're bringing up will be addressed. Congressman Louis Gohmert today said echoed your words, that the Hammond should not be in prison, that they were railroaded. But again, he can say that for a few days. He wins the news cycle, and then it likely goes away again. How do you think this is going to end? Is it going to end peacefully, or will it be a tragedy?
Well, there is very hopeful news coming out of Burns, Oregon, last night. The ranchers are getting organized, and I believe they are going to form a common law jury to investigate to document. I'm not exactly sure what the common law jury does. It's kind of like a grand jury of citizens looking at government from the outside in. And last night, Sheriff Ward met with Bundy, and apparently they agreed the sheriff is going to give them protection to leave the refuge. There was a trailer with feds, I'm not exactly sure what kind of a trailer, but it had federal people in it. They left, and so it looks like it's going to be a peaceful resolution.
I would hope so, and the attention this has gotten across the country. At the beginning, we kept hearing that the people of Burns didn't want these guys around, but I've watched many of the news conferences, and they come across as so calm and level-headed. Have they won over a great many people in that community now since this began?
Well, a lot of the people were on the side of the patriot groups that came in for the rally. The problem is one lady wrote a comment on one of my articles this morning. She said that a lot of the people in the town work for the BLM, and so they're all afraid for their jobs. Even when things go wrong, they're afraid to say anything because they might lose their job. And believe me, Burns, Oregon is out in the middle of nowhere. It's a very isolated community. And so if a person has a good job in Burns, Oregon, I imagine that just about anything can happen and they'll keep their mouth shut.
Yeah, there's that threat of intimidation, I think, that's going on. And when I hear that the Hammond lawyers as well, the Hammonds don't endorse this, that's because the Hammonds, if they're thinking about leniency, can't be seen as being allied with Bundy and the rest of the folks out at the refuge.
Well, yeah, Mr. Hammond was actually threatened by a U.S. attorney that if he talked to Ammon Bundy, if he did anything, that they were going to put him in a prison with more harsh treatment than he would otherwise have. And so, Mr. Hammond is, 74, 75 years old? I mean, basically going back to prison is a death sentence for him. And the death sentence will be even sooner if they send him into one of those really hardcore prisons.
All for burning a couple of juniper trees.
Well, yeah. I mean, I read the indictment. The indictment was just ridiculous. It was absurd. The one fire that he was convicted of setting, the BLM knew about it, and the BLM lights fires to burn off the dead grass, and so do all of the other ranchers. It's something that they have to do to make sure that they have grass to feed their cattle. Well, the one fire, it jumped a little bit. It went out a little farther out than what he intended. It happens all the time to all of them. But they chose to use that against Mr. Hammond. And then the other fire, the second fire that they convicted him of, that was a backfire. There was a wildfire on BLM property. There were no BLM people around, and the fire was headed towards Mr. Hammond's home and property, so they set a backfire, which burns towards the wildfire, and it put it out. It did exactly what it was supposed to do.
Vicky, can you hold on the line? I've got a hard break coming up, but if you can hold.
Okay.
We'll talk again on the other side of the break. Vicky Davis joining us this morning from TVOI News, and she's got some details. She has been over to Burns, and she has been as well out to the Wildlife Refuge. We've got more on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on KLIX. We'll get back to our guest in just a moment, but I do want to remind people, even though we're in that time of year when the hours of daylight are shorter, you still have a lot of powerful UV light that comes through your windows. One way to reduce that and perhaps protect many of your valuables in your home from bleaching effects is to put in window tints, and you can get a free estimate by getting in touch with the folks at Tint Lady. Now, they'll come out and do a free estimate at your home office, and they do automobiles as well, and paint protection. You can telephone them at 736-8469 or go online, tintlady.idaho.com. Nearly 25 years in business on the local level and locally owned and operated. 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturday by appointment only. And remember, don't squint, get tint. Vicky Davis is joining us this morning on the program, and she's spending some time with us talking about her visit to Oregon, where she had an opportunity to visit the encampment, I guess is the way I'll put that, at the Wildlife Refuge, where you have a group of patriots who are demonstrating, if you will, against the actions of the BLM, and also hoping that they can win release of both Dwight Hammond and his son Stephen from federal prison because of their run-in with the BLM some years ago, and also a run-in at one time with a U.S. attorney. Vicky, first of all, I want to mention it's 9:25, and we've got 30 degrees. You were just chatting with us about the BLM and controlled burns being, a common commonly done by both private ranchers and by the government. When you see this happen, you've got the EPA, which had the mine disaster, and they fouled a river through about 3 states. You've got the BLM, which has had its own troubles. Do you foresee perhaps pressure coming now on these federal agencies, finally someone holding them to account, because they don't go to jail when they cause one of these problems? Innocent Americans do, right?
Exactly right, and I certainly hope so. I mean, that's been my goal all along, is to have people look at the administrative layer of government. And that is so hard. I can't even tell you how hard it is to get people to look at the administrative layer, because we've got all of these politicians that, are out there attention grabbing, and it's my belief that they are virtually powerless to control the bureaucracy, the administrative state. And so, it's almost like our whole political system has become just a diversion, while the administrative state has gone rogue. And so, I mean, you can go out and vote and change politicians all you want to, but it doesn't change the administrative state.
Yeah, those people are there for 30 or 40 years in many cases, right?
Right. And whose direction are they following? Where is their direction coming from? And as it pertains to the environment, I believe it's coming from the United Nations, and I've gone back and researched, the creation of the EPA and how that whole structure was functionally set up, and it's a linked direct pipeline to the United Nations, from the UN to our Environmental Protection Agency. And the Environmental Protection Agency basically controls the other agencies of government through the requirement of the Environmental Impact Statement, which our own government agencies have to produce an Environmental Impact report for the EPA. So you have, like one agency that is at least manipulating the other agencies of government. So, and it follows through, down through to the states. So, what we really need to do is to really focus on this administrative state. You remember when we were working on S-1067, right?
Right.
Well, Vito Barbieri was one of the legislators. He's from District 2. He was one of the legislators that was opposing S-1067, and he gave the best speech on the administrative state, because they make the rules, they enforce the rules when there is protest, they adjudicate the rules. So they are a self-contained structure that can't be affected from the outside until you've exhausted all administrative remedies, at which point you can then go to court. Well, ordinary people do not have the resources to be able to do that.
Vicky, I've got to say thank you for joining us this morning. I'm coming up on 9:30. Quickly, website address again, your main website address.
thetechnocratictyranny.com.
And again, TVOI is where?
TVOInews.com is in Boise.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time, and obviously thank you for making the trip to Oregon to let people know exactly what's going on, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Bill.
Take care now. Vicky Davis joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Some of your comments coming up in a few minutes. But after the break, 29 right now. Call at 9:30. One more half hour until my weekend.